Welcome to the Carnivore Cast, the podcast focused on the carnivore diet and lifestyle, with practical advice from successful carnivores, citizen scientists, and top researchers. I'm your host, Scott Meslinski, and I'm here to speak with experts and experienced carnivores to get answers to your biggest and meatiest questions while helping you live your best life as a carnivore. Lisa Bailey has a long history in health, fitness, and nutrition, including certifications as a Primal Health Coach, Precision Nutrition Coach, and much more. She's suffered from a variety of health issues her whole life, including GI distress, loss of sense of smell and taste, severe allergies, and more, before overcoming them all on a carnivore diet. Previously, Lisa had tried low-fat, vegetarian, and elimination diets without success. I'm really excited to have you on the show, Lisa. Welcome.
Hi, thanks very much, Scott. Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, I'd love to just start, Lisa, if you could introduce yourself to the listeners and maybe give a little bit more of your story and your health journey as well.
Absolutely. Well, my name's Lisa Bailey, and I'm originally from the south of England, and I now live in Scotland. We just actually had our first snow today, so that was all very exciting. And I've had my house here for just over 20 years, although I've lived for some of that, 8 years of it, I've lived abroad. When I was young, I had a lot of GI issues, as you've mentioned. And I think that started really from when I was very small and had lots of bouts of tonsillitis. And I ended up having many rounds of antibiotics. And I think that had a real impact on my gut permeability. Obviously, that wasn't really known at the time, but I ended up with what would now be, I suppose, diagnosed as IBS, although nobody really diagnosed it. I did have some various tests. I had barium meal, I had an endoscopy, I had a laparoscopy throughout my teens, and nobody could really put their finger on what was happening. They just said it was, just GI distress, take some paracetamol and off you go, which wasn't terribly helpful. And really, I just sort of battled on with it. It was sort of intermittent on and off through the years. And I basically came to the point about 5 or 6 years ago where it was very frequent. It was happening all the time. And by this point, I had done all my nutritional certifications, so I was very interested in nutrition. And I thought, well, I must be able to work out what's going on here. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to start sort of eliminating things. And I'd been a vegetarian up until this point from about the age of 16, 17. I'd never really enjoyed food as a youngster, probably because I, had been ill so often. And I really didn't like meats. I really didn't like vegetables. I liked eggs, which is fortunate because they're very nutritious, but that's pretty much the only thing I really enjoyed eating. I didn't enjoy eating much at all. And I just felt that I would naturally do well as a vegetarian. So I did that when I left home. I became a vegetarian. And of course, in those days, as it still is, unfortunately, it was very much the low-fat paradigm, low-fat, heart-healthy grains. And I did all of that. Had lots of beans and pulses and all of those typical foods. When I first became a vegetarian, of course, there wasn't really the corn or the soy alternatives that we have now, which is actually probably a fortunate thing. But there was a few things here and there, and that really never helped my system at all. So I'd done a lot of research on the paleo diet, and I thought that sounds like it might be something that may work, and it sounded and felt like gluten might be an issue for me. So I decided to go ahead and do that, and I removed gluten, and pretty much immediately my gastric problems cleared up. But I decided to do the paleo diet as a vegetarian, and I soon discovered that really wasn't very viable. I'm a personal trainer and a fitness instructor, so I'm very active. And I just was so tired. I mean, I know I'd gone through the adaptation phase and the low carb type flu, although I wasn't particularly low carb at that point, but I just felt rotten. And I thought, well, maybe I need to make a decision here and try putting some, extra protein in, some animal protein in. It wasn't an easy decision, but I wanted to make sure that it was an ethical one. And so I wanted to make sure that all the meat and fish that I bought was going to be from, grass-fed, ethical, humane sources. And as soon as I put some chicken and fish in, I felt very different. I mean, my energy levels just soared. It was amazing. And I didn't really look back from that. I mean, my health just kept improving from that point. But as you mentioned, I couldn't smell and taste. And that had basically disappeared from about 3 months after we moved to Scotland, actually. My youngest children, my twins, were about 6 months old. And we'd moved to Scotland from London. So you'd think, lovely, fresh air. And suddenly I couldn't smell or taste. I thought I was getting a cold, but that didn't happen. Went to the doctor and said, I thought I was getting cold, but nothing's happened and I can't smell or taste. So she sent me to a specialist and they had a good look up with a camera. Couldn't find anything. There were no polyps. There was no obvious signs of anything. And so they sent me away with a steroid spray, said it's probably an allergy. Here you go. And you'll have to use this for the rest of your life. So not terribly helpful. And I did use the spray initially, but I didn't find it particularly effective and I didn't want to be on steroids forever. So I just decided to not use it. Shortly after that, we moved. We'd been in Scotland about 18 months and we moved to Tunisia for 4 years. And after that, we moved to Oman for a further 4 years. And obviously, they're very different climates. And I thought, well, maybe something will change, but it didn't. In fact, the only time that I ever had any sense of smell very briefly was when I did get a cold, bizarrely. And it was just really strange. I could smell and taste for a couple of hours and it might be very intermittent. And I could never put my finger on what was going on. And last year, in fact, it's about a year ago exactly, that is my carniversary, I decided out of interest to try a carnivore diet because I'd been very low carb. I'd been through a sort of a keto phase, although I hadn't really counted particularly. I don't enjoy counting macros particularly. And I'd read a lot of books. I'd read Villemar Stefansson's book, The Fat of the Land. I'd read Stephen Donaldson's book, Strong Medicine. And it just seemed to me that there was all this information that was largely hidden from general public about diets that did not include fruit and vegetables, even though we've told that they are absolutely necessary. And I found that really intriguing. And you had the Inuits who were incredibly healthy and people like the Maasai. And I thought that's really fascinating. And the more I delved into it, the more I found people online like Amber O'Hearn, who'd been doing it for about 8 or 9 years, and then a big community on Facebook, people that have been doing this diet for, up to 20 years, 40 years in some cases, very healthy people. And I just thought, wow, that's really interesting. And I said to my husband, I'm just going to try this out of interest because it just seems a really different thing to do. And I didn't do it for any other reason apart from that. But 3 weeks in, my smell and taste came back completely unexpectedly. I mean, I wasn't even thinking of doing it for that reason. It hadn't really crossed my mind. And the interesting thing about that is, having done more research, obviously, since, the International Center for Medicinal Nutritional Intervention, which was previously Paleomedicina, they state that in their research and with the patients they work with, it takes about 3 weeks for intestinal permeability to heal. And it was 3 weeks, almost exactly, that I'd started the carnivore diet, that my smell and taste came back, which was incredibly interesting. And it's been there ever since. And I'm now a year in and I still can smell and taste. I mean, it's just really amazing to me. And I feel fantastic. I really do. So that's my story in not so quick a nutshell, but there it is. And that's how I came to be carnivore.
Yeah, that's an incredible journey, Lisa. And thank you for sharing all of that. I'm blown away just by how persistent you were. And I can imagine how frustrating it must be. I've had my own share of health problems, probably nothing like what you've suffered through, but just going to doctor after doctor, having them tell you to try something, it not working, them saying, we really don't know what's wrong with you, for one reason or another. And I applaud you for taking your health into your own hands and finding a way to fix it. And constantly experimenting. I think that's something I really try to drive home on this show. So that's really impressive. And, it sounds like you've been through a lot. So I'm curious, if you could, would you go back into your past and change anything, and change the way it sort of turned out?
Well, that's a great question. You often see these things posted. If you could go back and change things in your life, and would you? And I think a lot of the time, we do obviously learn from our mistakes, and so most of the answers are generally, "Oh, no, I wouldn't go back." But actually, if I knew then what I know now about food and nutrition, I absolutely would go back. I would feed myself differently, and I would feed my children differently. Absolutely no questions, because I do carry with me a certain amount of guilt, really, because from what I can deduce from, what happened to me, when I look at everything, I had gut permeability. I was a vegetarian. I was on low fat. I had my 4 children, 2 of whom were twins, very close together. And I think by the time I lost my smell and taste, my twins were 6 months old, I think I was absolutely nutrient depleted completely. I had no fat coming in to really nourish my body's cells and to help me absorb any fat-soluble vitamins. I presumably was eating foods that can block absorption. And I'm sure that was true even then when I was paleo, because having that type of diet and putting the meat and fish back in still wasn't enough to bring back that sense of smell and taste. It was obviously something still blocking that absorption and obviously still creating that intestinal permeability. So yes, I absolutely would go back. My eldest son, I raised him as a vegetarian for 5 years, and I so wish I hadn't. I mean, luckily he's pretty healthy, and he's very into sports. He's a football coach, and all my kids, fortunately, are very aware of their nutrition and fitness. And I guess that probably comes from me as a role model, but I'm very grateful for that, because it could so have gone the other way. And I do wonder how different things may have been and how much better even they could have been. There's a lot of literature now that with Weston A. Price, I know Dr. Kate Shanahan has gone into it in her wonderful book about the way that nutrition literally shapes our faces and our jawline and our teeth, and all the really important structures of the body are shaped by the nutrition, and that runs through generations. Now, my eldest son did have a problem with his jaw and his front teeth, and he had to have braces from quite an early age. And you just wonder, would that have been different? I don't know, but it's food for thought, literally. So yes, I would go back and change that for sure.
Yeah, and your family is very lucky to have you, and I think it's remarkable sort of how resilient our bodies are. I remember as a kid just eating absolute crap, like growing up eating pizza and chocolate milk every meal, having, packaged pastries all the time, every time I went anywhere with my family, lots of candy. But it's remarkable just how quickly your body can heal. I think a lot of people are like, oh, I tried the carnivore diet for 8 weeks and, I'm not a ripped, healthful, amazing, supermodel. And it's like, well, how long did you do damage to your body? How many years were you just eating completely inappropriate food stuff? And it's really remarkable to me how resilient we are and how long humans can thrive in a suboptimal environment.
Absolutely.
Or survive, not necessarily thrive.
Yeah, we survive. And because our bodies are constantly they're seeking that homeostasis. They're wanting to be well. They're wanting to, the body's an amazing machine when you think what it can go through and what we can put it through. And yet, in our lives today, we literally determinedly put it through terrible nutrition, terrible health. And it still tries to bounce back. It's incredible. And yet when you look at doing optimal food, optimal nutrition and fitness, it's amazing how superhuman we can be. And actually, that's really how we should all be. We should all be able to be like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think everyone deserves to experience what it means to have some of the health benefits that folks find on a carnivore or ketogenic diet.
Absolutely. I think if you haven't experienced it, and it's not, you're always reverting back to your normal. And your normal might be that you feel fine, but if you don't know how good you can feel, it's such a shame because we can feel so great, and most people don't experience that.
Yeah, I'm very grateful to have found the information, I found on the diet, and that's a major reason why I'm doing this podcast, to hope to help others find it and experiment with it. And, if it makes their lives a little bit better for themselves and their loved ones, then that's fantastic. That's a win. And I'm curious, just on that point, Lisa, how did your family and the doctors you had talked to, or maybe you didn't talk to them anymore, but how did folks react when they saw some of the health changes you were going through?
Yeah, well, I didn't go back to any doctors, but my family certainly were quite amazed and obviously really surprised, because my children had never known me before I obviously started introducing meat into my diet about 5 or 6 years ago. They'd only ever known me as a vegetarian. So that initially was a huge leap for them. It was like, oh, my goodness. And they were quite blown away by it. And then suddenly, last year, I'm not eating anything except animal products. So they were very curious. But having, again, lived with the fact that I would have these really chronic bouts of stomach pain. Certainly my husband now, he was just, when I would have these evenings of just being in such chronic pain, he'd be, what can I do? What can I do? And I'm like, you can't do anything. You just can't do anything. It just has to, wear off, basically. And, so for him to see that resolving was great. And for everybody to experience the fact that my smell and taste had come back was just a wow factor, really. I think we all still are in a little bit of disbelief, because I know that I still go around, it's a year now, and I still go around smelling things just because I can hardly believe it, because 20 years is a long time. And you do get used to it, and you do still enjoy food to the extent of enjoying textures and eating super spicy things just for having something exciting happening in the mouth. And now, bizarrely, I don't use spices at all, and I don't enjoy it. And obviously I don't have any plant foods, so garlic and things. But when I smell that, either cooking it for my husband, or if I have clients in who I can smell have had garlic the night before, I can really smell it very strongly, and it's like, whoa, I really don't like that. And that's quite amazing, because before I would have been eating that a lot just because it would have brought some interest into my mouth. But they've been very supportive. I did think my parents would be, I know my dad laughs because he still can't quite believe from a vegetarian to a carnivore. But, they've been very supportive of it. I don't live near them, but when I go and visit, they're quite happy to, really encourage and do what they can for cooking. And, I'll get stuck in and help. And, they've been really great, really supportive of it. So I'm really thankful for that.
Yeah, that's excellent to hear. And it's fascinating to hear you speak about how your family had always thought of you and labeled you as a vegetarian, and now you're
Yeah.
kind of the carnivore. How do you feel about sort of labels like that and what it means for, you as a person and what you're eating and sort of your way of eating?
That's a really great question, because I actually don't like labels. I really don't like labels. And I think that comes from, we identify, if you have to identify yourself as by what you're eating or what you're doing, or I just feel it's very narrowing. And, you see it all the time on Twitter and Facebook and people's handles. They have to include it. And that's fine. I don't judge them for that. But I don't want people to take that one look at me and assume something. And I think that's the problem with labeling, is that people have, they have these preconceived ideas of what something is. And if they see the label paleo or they see the label keto, they will have their judgment of what that is. And that they put that onto you. And that may not be correct. And I think the other problem is that although it can be helpful when somebody is starting something new like this, and if you're looking at the internet and you're looking to find recipes or help, that can be quite helpful. I do see that. But then we then end up with companies who immediately jump on the bandwagon, and we've got paleofied muffins and ketofied desserts, and suddenly we're still eating what essentially is pretty processed foods, when actually that's not, for me, the point. The point for me is to strip things right down and to really eat very nutritious, basic foods that is super good, nutrient-dense food and fuel for my body, that's going to help heal it, that's going to help it work to its best. And I don't want to have to be, I guess, judged on that or a label put on that. And I know that, quite often I think I've been excluded from social events occasionally because I don't eat the same way as other people. And I think it's really quite sad, in the sense that for me, a social event is that it's about being with the people. It's not about what you're eating. And that shouldn't be the biggest thing about it. It shouldn't be such a big deal in that sense. So yeah, I do. And I also am very aware that in my business, I don't want people to assume that I'm going to be wanting to put all my clients on a carnivore diet. Everybody is different. I do look at everybody's cases completely individually, and, really look at what they're needing, what they're wanting. I mean, it might be that I feel they do need it, but they might not be there psychologically to want to do it. And so it's not going to work. So it's, I think staying away from labelizing everything for me is how I like to be.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I like the move away from labels. I personally obviously identify a lot with the carnivore label and tell people I'm a carnivore. But I think that's for different reasons than trying to create sort of in-group, out-group. It's more saying,
and I get that. Yeah.
And yeah, it's also, I've spoken about this with a few guests. I think there is a need to be a little bit more direct and outspoken about the way you eat as a carnivore, because if you aren't, if you just kind of hide in the dark, and if people want to do that, that's fine. It's a personal choice. But I think, you don't have to force it on people or be offensive, but just being open about it and allowing people to learn from your experience. It sounds like you do this a lot, Lisa. I think that is really important. And there's a difference between doing that and saying, I'm a carnivore, you're not a carnivore, you're not my friend, blah, blah, blah.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, yeah, I do. I think I am very open about it. I do talk to people about it, particularly if they ask. I don't force it on anybody. And I think it's also because you see so many detrimental things, particularly on social media, and people attacking each other for the way they're a vegan or they're carnivore or they're this or they're that, and it's so unnecessary, and it's so sad, that we come down to having to attack people like that, and I. Personally, I just try and really stay away from that. I just find that very negative.
Yeah, completely agree. I think keeping it positive is essential for this movement and this way of eating to gain traction and welcome people in, especially when they become disillusioned by all the other diets and communities that may be more closed-minded. And Lisa, one thing you talked about, I love the way you position it as the most nutrient dense food. So can you talk a little bit about nutrient density and maybe we can get a little bit more into the specific foods you're eating, and what, your eating plan, what foods you include or exclude are?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I do think that animal-based foods are extremely nutrient dense. We can, it's proven really that we can get all the vitamins and minerals that we need through meat, fish, eggs, dairy if you tolerate it. So for me, I guess I primarily eat meats such as beef and lamb, and I'm very lucky up here in Scotland. I mean, we have cows and sheep roaming about all over the place, and so we have wonderful farms up here. And if I, choose to have certified organic and pasture raised, I can get that delivered as well. So that's really easy. I do eat pork, and interestingly, I have an issue with pork that I've read quite a few people have issues with pork. It can give you symptoms such as nausea and diarrhea and vomiting, heart palpitations. And I've experienced that myself with roasted pork belly particularly, so very fatty pork. If I just roast it and eat it, then I can get really, really fast heart rate and feel really quite sick. But what I've learnt to do, interestingly, is I cook it twice. So I roast it, and then I let it cool, and then I slice it, and then I'll grill it. And it obviously changes the nature of the proteins in it because I have no issues when I eat it like that. And I have no issues with bacon and ham, the bacon I make myself anyway, and ham. And I guess the curing process changes the proteins in it as well. But it's a very interesting thing. And I don't know whether that's also perhaps something to do with still some intestinal permeability there, which it could be. So that's something that I'm sort of keeping an eye on. So I do include that. I do have chicken, although I don't have it often, but I do like it and I do have it. I do have salmon, which again, I'm very lucky. We have a fish van that comes once a week to our local village, and it's bringing fish in from the harbour, and so that's great. And I do include organ meats as well. So I eat liver and heart and kidney and brain, and sweetbreads. So I do feel, for me, that it's really important to get a really wide range of the whole animal. I know that a lot of veteran carnivores don't like it, and I guess if you've never eaten it, it might be quite an odd texture and taste. But I do think they're so rich, particularly liver is so rich in vitamins. It's such an important nutrient to take in. I do eat eggs, and I've now got my own chickens and ducks, so that's great. So I'm getting 6 eggs a day at the minute, so that's fantastic. I'm not eating dairy at the minute. If I do ever eat dairy, it's raw dairy, and I buy raw milk for my husband and my sons if they're ever home. They have that, but I don't tend to have a lot of dairy particularly. I don't know why particularly. It's not that I feel suboptimal. I just don't really feel the need for it, I guess. And I know that Paleomedicina, their protocol, although I don't follow that completely, their protocol is absolutely no dairy. Their thought is that it's a food for a growing animal, and a growing, when we're obviously feeding breast milk to babies, it's a food for growth. And once we're grown, do we actually need that food for that kind of growth? So that's quite an interesting take. So that's pretty much what I eat. And I do think that it's really important, if you're going to eat animal food, then I do think that eating the whole animal and using the whole animal is a really ethical thing to do. I think it's really important that we use the whole animal. We don't just select the few cuts that we prefer. If we're going to kill an animal, let's have respect and let's not waste, and let's use everything, because let's face it, it is all highly nutrient dense and really optimal food. So let's use it.
Yeah, I love that perspective, Lisa. And it sounds like you have some access to some really nice, fresh, local foods of all different kinds. The fish you mentioned sounds delicious. And I'm fascinated by what you say about organ meats. It seems, I was just thinking that in the UK, in England and Scotland, just a lot more people are brought up eating organ meats more regularly and are more familiar with them, versus in the States, maybe we're just picky eaters, but there's seems to be more of a stigma against them as gross. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I don't know. I mean, I know it's interesting because when I was a child, my mum we did have liver and kidney and all those foods. I mean, I hated them because I hated everything. But I didn't like them at all. But we did have them. My mum did make it and we did eat it. We didn't have brain and we didn't have sweetbreads, but we had, or heart, we had liver and kidney. I think she did cook heart and tongue occasionally, but I don't think that we were given it as children, but her and my father, I think, ate it. And in Europe generally, it is a normal, using the whole animal. It is normal. But yeah, I don't know why that is different in the States, but it definitely seems to be. The more that I see from people, they're just trying it and just, and it's a whole different kind of cultural thing. It's very interesting. So yeah, I don't know where that comes from initially. I mean, finding things like brain here now is very difficult because there's a ruling that the abattoirs are not allowed to pass that on to the butchers, so you have to find a friendly butcher maybe, or halal somewhere that you can get them. You can get it, but it's very difficult. And the sweetbreads, again, because they're not sought after here. There's a butcher. It's about an hour away from me. And they have an abattoir that's part of their butcher's shop. But most of the sweetbreads go for export. They go to Europe. But we managed to get, a friend of mine and myself, we get a regular sort of 6 kilo box between us every month or so. And they do that especially for us, but they don't sell them in the shop, which is really interesting. So I think there's far less people now eating this way than there used to be, certainly. I mean, my grandparents absolutely would have eaten that without a blink, but today not so much.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think, part of it might be that just that a lot, from what I've seen at least, a lot of meat seems to be more expensive in Europe and the UK. So maybe organ meats are sort of an economical alternative to eating steaks.
Yes. I mean, I can buy, and it's amazing. There's an online company that do Wagyu beef, and of course Wagyu beef and steaks are extremely expensive, but they do the Wagyu offal, and you can get a heart, and it is huge. It's absolutely huge, and you can get a heart for £5.50, and literally you can cut off. If you cut it like steak, you can get about 6 or 7 steaks out of that.
Wow.
And it's, yeah.
What's the name of the company, if you don't mind sharing?
It's called, no, not at all. It's called alternativemeats.co.uk.
Oh,
and
cool.
they do Wagyu beef. They do Mangalitsa pork, which is great. That's a really fatty breed of pork. They do all sorts of other weird and wonderful, kangaroo and all sorts of things. But that's what I primarily buy, is things like the Wagyu heart. I mean, it's such good value, and it's great. So, I mean, again, heart is extremely nutritious. So, yes, I think you're right. Economically, and certainly in days gone by, we would have definitely been buying that rather than, the bigger, more expensive cuts, for sure.
And Lisa, just a couple more questions on your diet and your version of carnivore. Do you implement any sort of fasting into your daily diet?
I do, yes. When I first started fasting, it was about 18 months ago. And I really, again, done a lot of sort of research and seen how fasting could be really beneficial for all sorts of things, body composition and just, autophagy and BDNF in the brain, all sorts of things. And I thought that looks really interesting. So I decided to implement that in my own life. And I found it to be really good. I felt so great. I was doing lots of fasted workouts in the morning. So I actually developed a course, which is an online course for people to learn how to do it properly and safely, and to implement that no matter what kind of diet they were eating, so that it could help them. Quite often, it helps people to transition into a better way of eating, because you're much more mindful when you are in that feasting window. You're much more mindful of what you're eating. And although I don't tell people what to eat, I do try and recommend, the types of food that might be good, and that obviously when your body is in a fasted state, when you're about to eat, then your cells are really ready and primed for some really good nutrients. And that's your opportunity to offer your body some really good nutrients, because it's ready to really uptake it. So I do try and educate people through that. And I've found that the longer I've done it, the easier it's become. And actually, because of the way I eat now, it's not there's no forcing, and it's a very natural fasting. I'm not fasting deliberately, I would say, anymore. I think it's just a natural, I eat when I'm hungry, and then I'm fasted, because basically I'm not hungry, and I'll just wait until I'm ready to feast again. So it's really sort of intermittent feasting, if you like. It's and that can vary day to day. I might go through from dinner time all the way through to lunchtime and think, oh gosh, I probably should eat now. Or I could wake up in the morning feeling really, really hungry, in which case I'll have something then, and then I may not eat again until dinner time, or I may have something mid-afternoon, and that will be me again till the next day at whatever time. So I find it's much more natural flow, really is. I'm much more in tune with my body, I think, through fasting. I think it really helps you to become in tune with your body and what you're needing, definitely.
Yeah, that sounds like an excellent approach. And another thing you mentioned, Lisa, is the Pkd diet. I'm curious, I know a lot of meats in the UK can be leaner, especially because they're more often grass-fed. Do you intentionally add a lot of fat to your meals?
Not particularly for me, no. I mean, I'm very, very, very interested in the Pkd style, and I have a client of mine who is eating. She's now a patient under paleomedicina with the Pkd diet, and so I've learned an awful lot about the way that they like people to have their meals, if you like, and how much to eat. I think for me, it's slightly different. I don't feel that I need to be in ketosis. I don't have an autoimmune condition that I'm trying to, help. So I don't feel that I need to. And for me, it's sort of more of a natural ebb and flow, because some days I'll have, steaks quite often, or lamb chops. And they have a certain amount of fat on them, so it's not too bad. But I know what you mean, that they're not the big one. When I see photographs on Facebook or Twitter of people like Sean Baker and his steaks, and the amount of fat on them is just incredible. We don't get them like that. We really don't. But I don't I might put a little bit of bone marrow on the top, which is really nice and very flavorful. But other days I might feel that I really need to have extra fat, and so I'll instinctively, that'll be a day when I tend to go for a fattier cut like pork belly. So I kind of listen to my body really, and if it's wanting leaner, then I'll eat leaner, and if it's telling me that it wants more fat, then I just naturally seem to gravitate towards more fat. I mean, interestingly, that's one of the things that I'm very careful with, because I don't do very well with rendered fats. They just go straight through me. So I have to be very careful with, I tend to just have the fat that is on the meat. I will cook or fry an egg. I will use some lard or some tallow, but I don't have a lot because it doesn't sit well with me, for sure. And I know, again, there's a lot of people that have that issue with rendered fats.
Yeah, I've heard that as well. And I think when I was adapting, I had that issue. And it took me months to overcome sort of the lack of acidity in my stomach and kind of getting used to the extra added animal fats. But something that can help with that transition for folks who are getting adapted is a supplement called betaine HCl, hydrochloric acid, which does help with that transition. And
yes.
Lisa, you mentioned eating the whole animal and, not wasting parts of the animal on carnivore. And I'd love to just hear you talk a little bit how you think about the ethicality of eating carnivore and sustainability as well, and how that kind of ties in.
Yeah, absolutely. Because this is one of the things that seems to be a big argument all the time, is sustainability and environment and environmental impact. But I do think that we're kind of being very short-sighted if we're going down the track of getting rid of livestock and going towards things like lab-cultured meats, which sends a shiver down my spine. I personally think it was always very important to me as a vegetarian to, part of one of the reasons was health, but it was also to do with animal welfare. And I'm still very big on animal welfare. I do believe that I completely understand when people can buy what they can afford, and I get that. But I think what the governments should be doing is really subsidizing the smaller farms, helping them to be able to produce really ethically, humanely raised animals, so that we really can start using land that can't be used for crops anyway, and making sure that we've got animals that are putting the nutrients back into the soil, and making sure that we've got meat that is ethically raised, and rather than all these subsidies that are given to people like soy and all the corn industries. We really need to be looking at putting the money into better foods. And again, I think if it's a big problem, because we've now come so far away from what our human specific, our human appropriate diet is. We're so far from that. Were everybody tomorrow to turn to not necessarily just carnivore, but to a really good eating pattern, we would all probably only be eating once or twice a day. So we wouldn't have the need for eating all the time. We wouldn't be snacking all the time. We wouldn't be eating as much as we're eating, generally speaking, I don't think. I know that I'm not alone in only eating once or twice a day in the way that I eat. And so, what if everybody was eating like that? Then that automatically cuts out a lot of extra food. There's ways of looking at it, I guess. And, for me, I just think it's really important that the food that I buy is raised humanely, has a good life, is eating the species appropriate food for it. So it's not, the animals are eating what they should be eating, the same as we should be. There was an article recently about animals in Melbourne Zoo who are now no longer being given fruit because the fruit is so sweet. It's overbred to be huge and sweet, and it's actually giving them They're becoming obese and having dental issues and all sorts of things that we're actually seeing in human beings. And yet, in the same article, it was very adamant that, humans need to have this. And thinking, can you not see the similarity here? We're giving animals the wrong food. We're giving humans the wrong food. What's wrong with this picture? And then we're worried about the sustainability. Well, we need to really be looking at what we should be eating. But that's a big change. That's got to come from I guess the grassroots is great because people are trying to take that under their control, which is really good. But unless you're going to get that big change from government to change it in schools, to change it in hospitals, to change it in prisons, to change it in nursing homes, how do we change it? I don't know. It's a very big question.
Yeah, it's really sensible way you frame it, Lisa, and it's great to hear your perspective coming from a vegetarian and animal welfare background as well. And I'm fascinated by this topic, and I'm excited to have some guests who I'm going to dive deep on sustainability and environmental impacts with soon, and how to feed large populations of people ethically and sustainably. But if folks can't wait for that, I'd encourage them to go check out the work of Peter Ballerstad, and he's grass-based, I believe, on Facebook and Twitter and possibly YouTube, and also Dr. Frank Mitloner at one of the University of California schools has done a lot of interesting work on greenhouse gas impacts of animals, and in particular ruminants. And he's
doing a really good job.
Yeah,
really good.
Yeah, and Dr. Sarah Place as well. But tying into that and talking about how feeding different animals sort of a species appropriate diet, Lisa, I know you have dogs. Can you talk about what you feed them and effects you've seen from that?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I've got two lovely Labradoodles, full of life, Sky and Mouse. And up until last January, they were fed a typical sort of kibble diet, and doing okay. But it tied in with me. Obviously, last October I had changed my diet, and I said to my husband, we were away actually in Cambodia, and I said, look, I really would like to try transitioning the dogs. They really should be on a carnivore diet. I don't feel, I feel so good myself. I don't feel that we should be giving them, what we're giving them. I think we need to look at it differently. So that's what we decided to do. So when we got back in January, I did that almost immediately. And again, my local butcher, they do dog mince. So basically, when they're running the mince from different meats through the machines, obviously it has to do a run through to clear it of the previous meat, I guess, so there's not cross contaminants from the different meats. So they bag that up and sell it as dog mince, which is great. So that's helpful. So I get some of that, and I also buy chicken and pork, and I get bones, and I have pig's ears and pork cheeks and all sorts of different things. So they get a very varied diet, and they also have heart and liver and sweetbreads. And yeah, I mean, it took about a week for them to transition. So obviously their tummies were a little bit playing up for a week. But wow, the energy that they had after that was, I mean, they were active dogs anyway, but wow, they were like little dynamos bombing through the woods. And, almost a year on, it's really interesting. We were just talking about it last night, funnily enough, because they have both really filled out with muscle. Mouse tended to be sort of, slightly on the skinny side sometimes, quite bony on her back. And they're just really strong, solid dogs. They're not fat. They're really healthy. The vet has said how healthy they are, and they're great. And interestingly, Mouse, who sort of lives up to her name quite a lot of the time because she can be quite timid, I saw a real change in her confidence. It was almost like the nutrition had really helped, with her, with the brain, and just seemed to be that she was much more confident. And actually, one of our neighbors was walking in the woods one time, and he had his dog. And previously, Mouse would always not really go up to Flora, and she would, really sort of ignore her. But now she's up there, and she's, hi, and how are you, kind of thing, and doing all the sniffing. And he said, wow, she's like a different dog. And I said, yeah, I know. And it's been since then, which is really interesting. But I think just normal, natural. I mean, that's how you'd expect it, really. I mean, when you're, again, feeding an animal the diet that it's supposed to have, then it shouldn't be that surprising that they're going to be healthy and active and inquisitive and lively, energetic, all those things. It's how it should be. So I'm so pleased that I did that. Really, really pleased.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And it's fascinating how not only the energy and the physical health of the dogs changed, but also their temperament and the mental side, which I think is what we're seeing in humans a lot. But great to hear about it with dogs. I just have a couple questions on this, and I'm sure there are a lot of great resources on feeding raw meat to your dogs, but wanted to ask you a few questions about it. One is, you feed them only raw, correct? No cooked?
Yes. Yeah. Only. Yeah. No cooked.
That's what I've heard. And how do you make sure they're getting the right proportions of offal versus bones versus meat, the right amount of fat? Because dogs have, from what I understand, generally a lower tolerance for fat and higher tolerance for protein. So I guess, how do you sort of measure that, or do you not worry about it too much?
I don't worry about it too much. I just make sure that I don't give them, if they have something like the pork, they certainly don't have that every day. They maybe have that once a week, maybe twice, and the rest of the time it will be more the mince, some offal. Again, they only have the offal maybe twice a week, because again, it can be, overly, you don't want to have too much. So I just try and give them a big mixture. And just sort of alternate different things, different days, really, just so they get a variety. And then not, you're right, you don't want to have too much fat or too much offal. So I just try and vary it, really. And yeah, that's how I work it.
Yeah, that's great. And Lisa, we've talked a lot about the nutrition side. I know you're also a personal trainer, big into fitness. So can you talk a bit about that and some of the things you've learned in that area as well?
Yeah. I feel that, certainly with my fitness, I definitely have seen some gains in strength, for sure. I've been much more able to, I feel like I've got more power in my physicality, which is nice. I do a lot of kettlebell training, so I teach kettlebells, and I do that a lot in my personal fitness regime anyway. And I do a lot of high intensity work and some cardio classes as well. So I do a sort of a mixture. But I really feel that movement in general is very, very important. I think it can be overlooked in the sense of, people are either wanting to go hell for leather and, it's got to be, doing all the really heavy stuff, or they're not doing anything at all. It's like one extreme or another sometimes. And people are afraid to do exercise because they think they have to go hell for leather, and so they don't do anything. And I think movement can be, categorized into different things, really. I mean, you've got activity, which is kind of like playing around and doing things. You've got just like exercise, which is actually, your deliberate workouts, if you like, and general movement every day. And, it's quite shocking to see how even children, when I used to do an after-school club for children in the local schools, and, it's shocking to see that the fitness levels are just not there. a lot of these children, they struggle to touch their toes. They're not flexible. They're tired before they've started, and they're oh, do I have to do that? Oh, all the time. There's no excitement and enthusiasm for movement. And I worry that we're raising now generations of children who don't know how to move properly, who aren't encouraged to move properly. And again, I see people that are not old. I mean, I have a lot of different age groups of clients, and I've got some fantastically fit 68-year-olds, that come to classes, and it's amazing. And yet I can have a 28-year-old come to me for personal training who just can hardly get up off the floor. I know that there's people are not necessarily going to be doing really high intense activities, but just to be able to be fit for your life, to be able to pick up heavy things, to be able to get up off the floor, to be able to do basic movements with ease, so that you actually have the freedom in your life to do whatever you want. That's really, for me, how, I want to be strong. I want to be fit. I want to be able to move. When I have grandchildren, I want to be able to play and move around with them and take them here and take them there and not be out of breath and pick them up and, throw them around. And I want to be able to do that. And I want to be able to take myself off around the world and lift my bag up into the overhead locker without any problem. All these basic things that we do in life, squatting down and sitting down and getting up. And, so many people are afraid or can't do that. And it's quite shocking, really. I do think that movement is essential. I think, there's a few pillars in our life that we really need to make sure we have under control. One is nutrition, one is movement, and the other one's probably sleep. But I do think that, movement for me is critical. I mean, I've gone through injuries. I've had injuries myself. I know what it's like to have a back problem. I had a back problem for years. And that really was only resolved once I'd started kettlebell training, because I really developed my core. I have a torn meniscus, but I've rehabilitated that. And again, for sure, I know that my diet has really helped with that. Absolutely. And, I know that we can all get through, as long as you're doing the right things and you know what you're doing and how to do them. We can all be moving and should be moving a lot more than we are. Yeah, it's important to me.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I love the way you frame it as the three pillars of sleep, nutrition, and exercise. And I think, people can emphasize one over the other, but you really need all three to have a healthy lifestyle and to optimize your own health and get to that point that we talked about earlier of really just enjoying life to the fullest. I think they're all essential. Well, this has been great, Lisa. Really appreciate your time. Where can folks find out more about you and what you're doing?
Thank you very much for having me, Scott. It's been great to be on. I'm on Twitter at @LBaileyHealth. I have a website which is lisabaileyhealth.com, and I run several different programs. I'm about to launch a kettlebell training program for beginners, hopefully by the end of this year or the beginning of the new year, for complete beginners. So I'm excited about that. And I'm on Facebook as well. I have a Facebook page which is Lisa Bailey Health. So yeah, anyone would like to connect with me, I would love that. It'd be great.
Great. Well, I'll certainly link to all those in the show notes. And thanks again for your time, Lisa. This has been great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Carnivore Cast. If you enjoyed this episode, please review on iTunes. It really helps us out. And share it with a friend. What questions would you like answered? Or who would you like to hear from in the carnivore research community? You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at CarnivoreCast, or go to carnivorecast.com. You can also email me at info@carnivorecast.com. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep it carnivore.